Hello everybody and welcome to tonight's Distinguished Writers Series reading with the poet Robert Polito, our director and our esteemed poet Tom Slay. Couldn't be here this evening because he's leading a debate, I think, on the subject of Aeschylus at the New York Public Library, so he's asked me to read his introduction. So when I use the first person pronoun in this, imagine, if you will, Tom Slay speaking these words. Say again. Oh, no. Poet, scholar, essayist. It's hard to know where to begin in introducing Robert Polito because his talents are so fine and so various. He's published in all the most prominent journals, and not just the literary ones. The New Yorker, Art Forum, Bomb, the New York Times Book Review, and on and on. He's won numerous awards, including the National Book Critics Circle Award, fellowships at the Guggenheim Foundation and the Ingram Merrill Foundation, but we could be here all night enumerating all the things he's won. So I'll just say that his books of poems, Doubles, and Hollywood and God, are two of the best books published by anyone in my generation, which is Tom's generation. He's also written a superb critical biography of Jim Thompson, which is also deeply insightful as cultural history, especially of the Depression and the New Deal. He's the author of a necessary critical book on James Merrill's magnum opus, The Changing Light at Sandover. It not only places Merrill in relation to contemporary poetry, but is certain to become indispensable as a reader's guide. And I was just about to forget to tell you what he does in his spare time. There's this foundation that you may have heard of that's based in Chicago. What's it called now? Oh yeah, the Poetry Foundation. Well, he's the president of that too. And the projects that he's undertaken: electronic annotated editions of various poets, multimedia collaborations between poets, the visual arts, and the worlds of dance and theatre, plus the normal work of reaching thousands of students, poets, and teachers through the Poetry Foundation website. Well, he manages to fit it all in while having read and seen every book and movie and art show I've ever brought up to him. This is a guy who has an omnivorous, visionary imagination, who loves the arts and is a glorious polymath. And Robert does all this while doing what all genuine poets must do. He continues to stand, as Ian Forster once said about the great Greek poet Constantine Cavafy, at a slight angle to the universe. But tonight, I want to focus on his poetry and say a few words about what I love in his work. His most recent book of poems, Hollywood and God, is a brilliant sui generis work, a surprising mix of fictionalized autobiography, traditional lyric, and psychological reflection that is detached and passionate at the same time. His poem about the Elvis impersonator who mutilates her face to look in her own eyes like the face of Elvis is a terrifying and weirdly humorous poem, a kind of Dostoevskian flight between deliberate bathos and a deeply felt account of one's soul's dark night. The poet's obsession with alternative identities is mirrored in the virtuosic movement among the many different conventions, both in prose and poetry, that the poet resorts to in order to give back a bizarre and utterly compelling American emotional landscape. I'll never be able to think of the phenomenon of Catholic school without thinking of Father Feeney denouncing Mass in slow motion as a book more depraved than Lady Chatterley's Lover. On a larger scale, the poem dramatizes the poet's need to escape the confines of his own identity. I myself am hell could be the motto of this book, with the emphasis on the grammatically slippery nature of I. The poet's use of autobiographical conventions, in which the poet deftly mixes fact with fiction so as to produce the feel of autobiography, even when the reader knows that the poet is resorting to a persona, is a profoundly new way to make poetry escape the dead ends of Robert Browning-ish dramatic monologue, in which the poet dons the mask and never takes it off, as if unaware that a postmodern sensibility sees only the face showing through. In this profound understanding of how identity needs to keep being refigured in order to maintain its integrity, tonight's reader is a superbly self-aware, deeply felt, and original poet. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Polito.
thank you very much. I'm not sure who I should thank, actually, first. Do I thank Gabriel for that rendering, or do I thank Tom for writing it? But it is kind of amazing to watch an introduction be turned into a dramatic monologue simply by the absence of the person who wrote it. So I'll start by reading some poems from Hollywood and God, maybe 4 of them. And I'll start with the title poem. But let me say, can you all hear me back there? This is a long, thin room. It's great to be at Hunter, and it's great to see so many friends here. Is that better or worse? Better? Okay. So it's great to see so many people that I know and love here. So I'm going to start by reading the title poem of the book, which I was saying in the class that I visited earlier today, that I've always imagined as the book itself as the speaker of this poem. Hollywood and God. If only God would save me, I would know how to hurt you. If only God would save me, I would know who to sell my soul to. Anything is an autobiography, but this is a conversation. William Burroughs insisted literature lagged 50 years behind painting, thinking no doubt about abstraction, collage, fragmentation, his cutouts. But whatever that meant, why always 50 years? Or however he presumed to rile other writers. Poetry probably does lag behind any credible media theory about it. So that if I put a pine tree into a poem, a grove of pine trees, and beyond them the sea, you'd think it was the same tree Wordsworth put there, instead of 2 obligatory centuries of nature studies, all those Technicolor vistas, tort songs, couples drifting through leaves in Salem commercials. Into one life and out another, the way a junkie playing a writer playing a priest, so that when I finally blurted out, "You betrayed me, I wounded you, we're so unhappy," you assumed the burden of personal urgency. Suppose it was me speaking at the limits of my self-control, and not the damn don't cry, temptation, and leave her to heaven. You open your mouth, and a tradition dribbles out. But that's mimesis. How almost impossible to avoid mimesis. Anybody's hardest truths prompting the most fractured constructions. The way to think about God might be to disobey God, if only God's wish to remain hidden. So that if everything is an autobiography, this is a conversion. As my lives flash before me, why must the yearning for God trump all other yearnings? You often hear converts confess the drinking, his pills, her sexual addiction. Concealed inside them a yearning for God. But why not the other way around? The admission of Jesus into your life, concealing instead the wish, say a need, to be fucked senseless, drunk, drugged, and screaming, oh God, on a hotel bed. God embraces our yearnings. That afternoon, my father heard his diagnosis of inoperable cancer. My Aunt Barbara demanded we get him to Lourdes. She demanded this with a glass of vodka in her hand. She demanded this running her fingers up and down my leg. She demanded this before she passed out in her car. In the movie of my life, my father died after I forgave him. And when my secret tormentor said, may the ghosts of your dreams gnaw at your belly like a wolf under your jacket, did she really want revenge, or was she just killing time? For me, God is a hair shirt, or he's nothing. For me, God is a pain in the ass. That's mimesis again. This hour, I tell you things in confidence. I might not tell everybody, but I'll tell you. The world is a road under the wall to the church. The world is a church, and the world is a road, and the world is a stone wall. Still, he wanted her the way the cardinal wanted the Caravaggio. And when the ill-advised possessor of the painting resisted, one night papal guards searched his house. Of course, contraband came to light, some illegal rifles. And when the ill-advised possessor of the painting went to prison, the cardinal got his Caravaggio. But I wasn't a cardinal, nephew to the Pope. And you were not a Caravaggio. So I asked you to be in my movie. This next poem is in a very kind of different vein. It's called Mike the Winger, after somebody that I knew when I was growing up. And the city of the poem is Quincy, Massachusetts. And I guess I'll say a little bit more at the end of it. Mike the Winger. City of Presidents, city of the Granite Railway and Four River Shipyard, but city too of condoms ground into our pitcher's rubber, and city of water rats and black leeches floating in the spring runoff. City of the first Howard Johnsons, the first Dunkin' Donuts. City of Lee Remick modeling summer dresses for her father's store. And city now where Beatles albums drop from the sky as Mike the Winger speaks from inside a circling crowd. Pockmarked, pimpled, and blazing, he looks, Tommy LeBlanc said, like someone set his face on fire, then stomped it out with golf shoes. As he straddles his new black Phantom, as he rocks on his new red Keds, as he pounds his wire basket of new LPs, Mike demonstrates the legendary gesture that gave him his name. I play him once, then I wing him, he says. Every afternoon, Mike spins his own top 40 from his bike, like a paper boy launching the Patriot Ledger across our lawn. Those Rolling Stones, those Beach Boys, those groups all you kids like, they're okay. But man, I love them Beatles. They wing up real good. What about his parents? Where does he grab all that cash? Nobody stops to ask, caught in the awe of the grander phenomenon. Manna from heaven. Records ease from their jackets and arced into air. Records pristine and gleaming in trees. Records scratched and gritty on the streets. Amid shouts of go Mike, go nuts, go wing nut, come on Mikey baby, wing one over here. The hits just keep on coming. The dead are everywhere. But if Mike is still alive, he'd be tracking retirement age. Though how do you retire from something like winging? Mere technological obsolescence? Mike frustrated by CDs, casualty to a digital age? Maybe winging records is like making movies or saying mass. You're calling. You do it until you can't do it anymore. Mike worshipped the early gods of rock and roll, Chuck Berry, Elvis, Little Richard, and Buddy Holly. Then he winged everybody else. None of the records Mike tossed have ever gone away. Who would have guessed that? City of John Adams and John Quincy Adams, our second and sixth presidents. City of Miles Connor, rockabilly singer and art thief. City of Robert Polito. City of Mike the Winger. I read that poem once in Los Angeles, and this guy came up to me at the end of the reading and said that his parents owned the record store where Mike bought all of his records in Quincy Square, and he had this photo that he ultimately sent me of Mike with a 45 in his hands, about to kind of launch a record, and it was taken at a McGovern rally of all things, and Mike for a lot of reasons hated Richard Nixon, but the main reason was that to give a speech one night, Richard Nixon had preempted his favorite TV program, and he never forgave him for it. So I mean, apparently at this rally, he was saying all of his famous things, kind of wing it over here and that sort of thing. This next poem is called Deep Deuce, and Deep Deuce is a phrase that I learned years ago when I was researching my Jim Thompson biography. It means way down on 2nd Street, and it was the street in Oklahoma City where all the jazz clubs were in the teens and 20s, so that you could see any Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington and everybody else was on that street. And by the time I saw it, it had been just completely destroyed by urban renewal and then never built back up. It was so that you'd see like the footprints of buildings or a little chimney here and there, but nothing else. It was really a kind of ghost town. And you can read about actually Deep Deuce in Ralph Ellison's letters, because he wrote a lot about that street in terms of music. Deep Deuce. As phantoms direct life from the shadows, I feel I leaned on something and it broke. My father on the porch with his crossword said, "This must be what it feels like to be dead." When I returned from the dead, there was no one to greet me, but still you were glad. I wander the ruins the way my tongue wanders my missing teeth, the bricks and mortar of Deep Deuce, rotted like molars in an ancient mouth. Here, Charlie Christian might have walked. The astrologer counseled patience and creative imaging. Step 1, visualize an object that symbolizes the accursed influence. Picture yourself throwing it into a furnace. Step 2, visualize the person who is responsible for the curse. Imagine one end of a rope is tied around your waist and the other around that person. Picture yourself cutting the rope with a chainsaw as you call out, "You have no power over me." Step 3, repeat twice a day for 11 days. You visualize her green boots inside the furnace. No, you're in a crematorium and you see her perfect and corruptible body on a tray sliding into fire. Then you see yourself cutting the rope that ties you together with a saw. And then, at last, your own imperfect and corruptible body, I mean me, calls out, and I jump in after her. And I'll end this little tour of Hollywood and God with the first poem, which is called Hollywood Hills. Her soul drifts across the continent. She keeps returning to the hills above Hollywood, the famous addict who once made love to her after watching her first with another woman. She is remembering the night he mocked her for crying out his name. I was your own private whore. Still damp from the shower, still almost naked, but not yet of guile, he is telling the lovesick woman what he guesses she refuses to hear. Things are bad. How can he not leave? But as a rose turns and closes, the next morning, he thinks he overhears the hotel staff moan his name. Name in the night, she repeated so passionately, with derision. In the running ink of the rain-soaked newspaper, she glimpses the forecast, rain. My life was difficult for lots of reasons. Before I was an actress, I worked at the trendy New York hotel. He kept trying to get me up to his room. This was before I really met him, but I always said no. Even though she tells him it makes her feel coarse, she amuses him with stories of her ancient lovers. You'll never get over this being an actress, he says. The scratched disc stuck on, love you, love you, love. She phones his machine, demanding no more calls. Forgive me, I can't talk to you. Talking to you makes me phone other people, one in particular, to ask him to stop calling too, and this must stop. Like a singer who ghosts his own voice for the live show. There were always 3 of us in bed, him, whatever girl he really wanted, and me sucking away. I wondered, she says, how God would remake me. Now I know. So I'm going to read some newer things now. I'm going to start with actually a cat poem. It's a poem about one of our cats, and it memorializes a moment when one of our cats discovered the difference between, I guess what you might call reality and film reality, between what's on the screen. and what's not on a screen. And it references some of the earliest cave paintings, El Castillo and Chauvet, and it particularly references near the end some of the great early films of the Lumiere brothers, Auguste and Louis Lumiere, and particularly Auguste's daughter, Andre. And I'm thinking of a film that they made, a 60-second film that shows Andre eating a biscuit. And it's titled Maya, after the name of one of our cats, who was in fact named after the experimental filmmaker Maya Deren. Maya. All of our cats have since died, but back when 2 were alive. Maya drifts past the TV on the way to the kitchen and stops. Her eyes registering, that's quick random motion up there. That's a cat on the screen. That's a cat I know. That's Lisa. The backstory ultimately is trivial. Testing out a borrowed camera, Christine filmed Lisa eating and played it back to confirm everything worked. Trivial, I mean, compared to, for in psycho-historical terms, this is the discovery of representation. Maya circling behind the familiar luminous rectangle where no Lisa. Running to the food bowl, no Lisa. Then back to the TV and Lisa. The tyranny of representation, CLR James tagged it. But not so much the bold shaman caves of El Castillo or Chauvet, with their ochre oryx, horses, and human hands. As Andre Lumiere on her high chair in 1895, when Auguste hands her a biscuit she appears to try to give to someone just beyond the frame. That's Uncle Louis, operating the cinematograph. Andre Lumiere, who would grow up to assist her father's medical research and die during the influenza pandemic of 1918. People who love animals used to love people, Howard Moss tagged it. As Maya starts again for the kitchen, starts to eat. The next 2 poems are from a series that I've been working on that revolve around songs. They're all sonnets, and this one is about Robert Johnson's great song, Love in Vain, that was first recorded in 1937. I'm guessing that almost everybody probably knows it through the Rolling Stones' 1969 version of it. And it's also one of those poems that trades on mishearing lyrics of songs and kind of, reinventing lyrics that, like there's a whole book of those that came out, I think, that was named after a mishearing of a Jimi Hendrix song that was called Excuse Me While I Kiss This Guy. This is called Love in Vain. Of our first album, critics remember only the flaws. Major domo, manager, producer. I recorded the band live from Boston's Park Street Station over a payphone to my parents' house in Quincy. Rush hour subway screech tilting everything apocalyptic amid the operator's recurrent 10 cents for 3 more minutes, please. I had nothing to lose, Malloy said. I would have made love with a goat to know what love was. Our repertoire, a mangle of Peking opera gong and folk blues, turning on toxic mix-hearing of the plaints. It's hard to tell, as ka-ching, another dime drops. Hard to tell when all your blood's in Maine. That poem also turns on people remembering payphones. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. This next poem is, I guess memorializes a 1961 song by James Darren called Goodbye Cruel World. You know that song, Goodbye Cruel World, I'm off to join the circus? And it's called Your Call. My mother worked the tilt-a-whirl at the Jefferson County Carnival, or so someone said. The rock rib bass of generators, underneath the calliope tooting, Goodbye Cruel World, over carpet clowns, spec girls, and an armless knife thrower retreating to his tent between shows. Let the people point at me and stare. From home to the edge of town is a bike ride, or the shoot me out of a cannon trip of a lifetime. Your call. This next poem is set in an artist colony outside of Genoa called Bogliasco, and it's set in an area where you can walk along the shoreline there, and it's very beautiful. Bogliasco. I'm always running ahead of my life. The way when we walk, you are always 3, 15, 40 steps behind, taking a picture or inspecting a bottle brush tree, a cornice, the sea as it breaks white on the striated rock. As though I can't dare look, and I'm always running away from myself. The way when we walk, you are always asking me to slow down. And what will happen when one of us dies? And if it's me first, when there's no one's back in our photos anymore. This next poem, I'm almost apologizing in advance for reading it. You know, those music poems are also really high school poems in a way. You know, they're poems about, you know, what I and my friends did in high school. And this next poem trades on that, but kind of with a vengeance. It's about, or it evolves from this little mythology that I and a group of friends invented that was partially based on our reading of things like the Conan novels or, you know, Lord of the Rings, and also our kind of contempt for the Catholicism that we were experiencing in the Jesuit high school that we all went to. So this poem is called The Secret of the Universe, but if it does get a subtitle, it's the sort of The Secret of the Universe, the Gospel according to, you know, Peter, John, Paul, Ed, and Robert. And you'll see that those names kind of come up in it. But again, I sort of apologize in advance for it because I'm not even sure what it's about myself. When Barp the Gub, Peter said, when Barp the Gub died and passed to the other world, he chanced on Jacob Cridey, rumored to be a younger stepbrother of Jesus, at the center of a vast crowd in one of the many town squares of heaven, maybe even the main square. Once Jacob Cridey saw Barp the Gub, he stopped speaking to the crowd and urged Barp, John said, to come forward with a familiar sweep of his arm and a welcoming, another round of coffee for my new friend. The crowd tensed, restive, a hint of rebellion under the arbor vitae, as though refusing to temper their ire at a further ill-timed interruption. Then they relaxed again, according to Barp, Paul said. Despite all the caffeine some must have sipped since those earliest days, perhaps cheered anew by anticipation, the rights of fresh coffee and milk, the eternal glories of occasion or company. While we're waiting for my father and brother, I'm ready to tell my people the secret of the universe, Cridey enthused to Barp, Ed said. The newly dead continue to gather at the crowd's edges, soon pressing under the arches and around the colonnades, past the Mug and Muffin, the out-of-town news, Cardulos, and along the aqueduct up the hills into the ancient forests. Now, Barp the Gub, at last the secret of the universe, Jacob Cridey resumed. As he gestured, I said, into the distance to invite the latest arrivals closer. But first, another round of coffee for our new friends. It's basically, Jacob Cridey is always about to reveal the secret of the universe, but every time somebody dies and shows up, he stops himself and invites them in with another round of coffee for my new friend. So I'm going to end with a poem that's from a series of poems that I've been writing about, rooted in Plutarch's essays, not the great biographies of the Greeks and Romans, but the essays called the Moralia that have titles like How to Tell a Flatterer from a Friend, or Why the Delphic Oracle Talks in Verse, and titles like that. And They're the first experimental essays that I know of and that I've ever read. I mean, they're very heavily collaged in a way that we would think of collage today. And each of the poems takes its title from one of these essays. And this one is called Sayings of Spartan Women, and it's in 5 sections. And the opening line of each of the sections is a direct quote from Plutarch. Sayings of Spartan Women after Plutarch. 1. On her husband Leonidas' departure for Thermopylae, while urging him to show himself worthy of Sparta, she asked what she should do. He said, marry a good man and bear good children. I'm better at controlling my environment than my behavior. I like saying things like, I'm better at controlling my environment than my behavior, as though I'm announcing something decisive and not just saying no and yes at the same time. I'm the smartest person in almost any room I walk into, and I pretend to be the craziest. I've gotten smooth at intimating I'm lots of things: the blonde, a housewife, my daughter's buddy mom, your neighbor with devastatingly shrewd advice and a pill for every occasion. Peel away my pretending, and what you got? That's a good question. My husband treats me like one of his trauma cases. I like it that my husband treats me like one of his trauma cases. It's what I love most about him, that he doesn't judge and sees how lucky he is. 2. Someone contacted a Spartan woman to ask if she would agree to let him seduce her. She said, when I was a child, I learned to obey my father, and I did so. Then, when I became a woman, I obeyed my husband. So if this man is making me a proper proposal, let him put it to my husband first. Whenever we're talking on the phone into the night and I hear my husband downstairs returning late after his shift, I whisper that we must hang up right away. I say I should look asleep, or my husband will want to have sex with me. I like telling him my husband will want to have sex with me, so he'll have the image of me in bed inside his head, and the nights I don't pretend to be asleep. It's so painful wanting something I can't have. I like writing him it's so painful wanting something I can't have, when I know he'll reply, of course I can have it any time I want, if I really want it. Ordinarily, I hide my face under a pillow, but last Sunday was wild and free. Accidental, ambient sex. My husband, so grateful, surprised, I thought he'd cry. But he must have known I wasn't there in our bed with him. 3. Certainly when someone asked what gain the laws of Lycurgus had brought Sparta, he said, contempt for pleasures. Mornings, I head out for slow, punishing runs through the hills above my house to relax. Almost everything I do to relax. Yoga, Pinot Grigio, pot, running no matter what until I burn all over, talking and talking, even blowing Adderall every once in a while up my nose. People think of me here as a wife, the wife of a saint who denies he's a saint, but my husband tells them I'm the saintliest person he knows. I like it that my closest friends are secretly crazy, and they bring their secrets to me, like I'm their priest or a private pharmacy. My father threw up in front of the guests at his 50th birthday party. Everyone enjoys his company, though you could probably call him an alcoholic. No, you can't. You have no right, but I can. 4. Another Spartan woman, as she was handing her son his shield and giving him some encouragement, said, either with this or on this. I'm a terrible liar, so his number is in my phone under the name of an old roommate I never call anymore. That way, anyone who looks will think I'm back in touch with her. I like saying things like, I'm a terrible liar, for the suggestion of reluctant but ultimate morality, and a hint those words could themselves be a lie. So my family knows we talk, but not how much, or that we meet for lunch when I go into town, but not what we do after. That way I'm not saying anything that isn't true, as if I'm on the witness stand or a stealth mission. My mother taught me to sacrifice my happiness for others. Even then I saw there's power in that, and you can tilt the game so sometimes you get a lot of what you want. But I won't do anything, or nearly anything, to shame my daughter. A friend accused me of loving the drama more than I wanted him. But what was her point? That he wanted me more than he loved the drama? 5. On noticing a house in Asia roofed with square beams, the Spartan asked the owner whether timber grew square in that area. When told no, it grew round, he said, "What then? If it were square, would you make it round?" I'm better at controlling my environment than my behavior. I like saying things like I'm better at controlling my environment than my behavior, and not just yes and no at the same time. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. I understand there might be questions.
If you have a question, put up your hand, and Anna will bring in the microphone for you to speak into. And,
And I'll try to answer
15
them
minutes
even.
of Q&A, and then books will be on sale after that, and you can get them autographed at the front. So I think we've got a question
Yeah.
in the middle there.
A smattering of hands.
Hi. Excuse me. Thank you so much. Is this on?
Actually, I'm not sure if it's on, but it is a microphone, though, so you should talk into it.
Looks like it's on. Why don't you shout?
Yeah.
My question is, and thank you so much, love the basketball, and I'm wondering who the speaker was. I really want to know.
Well, it's a series of, it's basically a series of people, you know, I mean, and the original essay is very much, it's called Saying to the Spartan Women, and just kind of is just a kind of random collection of sayings to Spartan women. I just sort of took some things that I knew and some things that I made up and arranged them a little bit more topically than they were. Each one kind of linked to, you know, a direct quotation from the original essay. And that's the format that I think I'm using for the others.
But it felt somehow like it was the same woman in each one.
A little bit. It's a little bit, but it's not, you know, it's a mixture. It's actually a mixture of people. It genuinely is.
You did it very well.
Well, thanks.
Hi.
Hello, hello.
Okay.
I just wanted to know what your writing process is like, and I was interested also in knowing what your PhD is in, if it's in writing or in
Okay.
literature.
Im-
If your
I think the microphone dropped out like after the.
So
I did hear the word PhD somewhere in there. But
I was interested in knowing
the writing process and then what my PhD is in. My PhD is in English and American literature. I didn't go to a writing program, even though I started one at the New School. My writing it varies a lot. I mean, I've always had a day job, so it's actually very hard for me, except, you know, during vacations or summers or when I go away to someplace like Boleasco, to actually have something that's a daily writing process. I try to read something interesting every day, because reading is really important to my own writing process. Not that the poems that I write necessarily reflect what I'm reading, but if I don't have kind of rhythms in my head of poems that I like, you know, it's very hard for me to write anything. And most of my poems start as notes in a notebook written out by hand, and then at some point I type those up and then see what I've got, and then kind of work around what I find. Okay, I was seeing if the questions.
I
coincided with the demise of the microphone. But yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad you asked about that. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, so that's in a way, that's the whole point of the poem, is that like he never gets around to disclosing to this vast throng what the meaning of life is. No, I mean, if I had, you'd be the first to know, or among the first to know. Yeah. So nothing beyond the secret of life. Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that. But that's said by a former student from the New School who was herself a great essayist. I mean, when I was talking to this great class, of Catherine and Donna's and Tom's students here, what I was saying is that almost everything I've learned about writing essays comes from writing longer poems in some ways, and particularly like a long poem that's in my first book, Doubles, called Evidence, that's in, I think 12 or 13 sections. And within that, there are these like kind of little narratives that might only be sustained for a section. And there are these kind of running, I don't know, like, things, these running events that are returned to in various sections. But it was through writing that I basically learned how to write prose, and that it was that, so that like when I wrote my biography of Jim Thompson, the structural idea behind that is that I had these very long chapters. Like there were, I think, nine chapters about, 50 to 60 pages long. But within that there were lots of little sections with an asterisk in between them, so that the book would move in a direction for a couple of pages and then stop, and then it would move in another direction for a couple of pages. And what I found was that kind of larger arc with these smaller arcs inside it was a very useful and effective way for me to work. And so I go back and forth writing poems like that often have. I mean, I don't necessarily tell you that like the Maya poem is in 3 sections with asterisks, but that's how it. How if you saw it on a page it would be, and it's the same principle. And I think that, Michael, you could speak to this too. I mean, there's just, there's this whole phenomenon of poets' prose over the last 20 years, in which some of the most interesting prose books, whether it's people like Maggie Nelson or Eula Biss or Andrew Munson or, yourself, I mean, they're written, or, Tom Slay's great essays for, Poetry Magazine recently. They're written by poets, and they're, I think, the kind of essays that only people who are thinking about art and craft, as well as information, could write. So they're structurally very interesting. They're formally inventive, and I think that's the best of both of those worlds.
Yeah, I find I was going to actually ask you if you see that.
Well, there's 2 books that I'm working, 2 prose books that I'm working on. One I've just been working on and off for a long time, called Detours, 7 Noir Lives, that sort of tracks these 35 moments across these 7 people. And that very much has that kind of structure where it's, it'll be in sections, but it will switch from one figure to another figure and then kind of move forward. It's like, it's not 7 essays, it's, they each get 5 for the most part. And then the other book is, I have a book under contract with Norton to do a book on Bob Dylan since 1990, and it's really the subject of the book is very much about how somebody reinvents himself in middle age. So it's going to cover none of the stuff from before that. So someone reinvents himself with a new way of writing songs. It's very collaged with a radio program, 100 concert dates a year. And these various kind of musical things, like he insists on playing lead guitar for a couple of years, then he plays the piano for a couple of years, and then he mainly stands at the microphone without any instruments for you know, it's this kind of endless kind of moving within a set of diminishing givens in some ways as he gets older. And I want to do that as a kind of abecedarium, you know, that would be like 26 short sections, in part to keep it, you know, some control over the length of it, you know, that if I write 26, I don't know, like, you know, 1,500, 2,000 word sections or something, like that would be the book. And so that keeps me from having to be chronological. It keeps me from having to tell this kind of big master narrative, and allows me to address all of these kind of isolated things. And the great thing about the abecedarium is, of course, you can change the title, and you can move them around. You know, something can be called a garden, or, you know, it can be a G, or it can be in the garden and be I. You know, I mean, that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah, inocular. And then, you know, the great book that she wrote before that too. You know, the No Man's Land, with that, you know, which I think is just one of the best essays, you know, that anybody's come up with. I saw another hand. Yeah. That's not really true. I mean, the Foundation, yeah. Don Cher's the editor of the magazine. It hasn't so far, you know. I mean, though I could always imagine it doing that in some ways. I mean, but I mean, when I took the job, I was very forthright, and it's in writing that I have, you know, that though I haven't really taken advantage of this as much as I could, that I have this time to do my own work, and part of the reason why I was hired was because of the work that I had done. It that wasn't a negligible part of it. But I don't know. I mean, I think everybody deals with, you know, a variety of expectation, like after a certain point of like who they are, you know, and I think that's true of all of us, whether you run a foundation or you've just written 2 books. I mean, everybody wants, you know, or a lot of people want people to operate within a very limited and narrow sphere. And so I don't feel it in a way any different from I felt it before. Yeah, someone's going to wait for the microphone.
Ah, it works. Oh.
No, it didn't matter. It was a
Rawness that I haven't observed in poems that aren't autobiographical in nature. So my question to you is, when you write these characters, do you insert, and if so, to what extent, elements of yourself, or do you see them as purely separate beings?
But it's both simultaneously. I mean, there are clear elements of both autobiography and just things that I know that, you know, I know that people I know have said. You know, and I've always liked that. I mean, I've always liked, you know, doing that, whether in prose or poetry. And again, this came up in that class, you know, beforehand. And I think that. Years ago at the New School, like we did this evening with Jeffrey O'Brien and Luc Sant, and the title was called Poetry of Fact, and it was kind of based on the idea that there's these kind of nuggets in the, you know, in the real world that are often, you know, at least as and sometimes more interesting than things that people can make up, and I've always wanted to write nonfiction and poetry that was alert to those, you know, nuggets of fact, or that kind of poetry of fact, where people, you know, where people can say, you know, things that, you know, I think only like the greatest writers could ever think of. I mean, I remember a friend who is actually the Paul mentioned in the Barp de Gub poem, is that he had this job at night working in the St. Margaret's Hospital boiler room when he was in college, and the subject of Guinness came up with one of the other people who worked there, this very old man, and the guy said, "There's eating and drinking in it both." You know, I mean, I defy anyone in this room to make that up, you know, but it's a great phrase, you know, and I think people say, you know, things like that all the time if you're listening. Well, I mean, I've always wanted to, I mean, not thematically, because I mean, I think that the approach that I have is kind of oblique enough that I can feel that I write about lots of things that are very close to me without, you know, necessarily being like confessional about it. But I mean, the kind of unwritten story of my family is that, like, you know, I can't go back on my father's side beyond my father, really, like, you know, and you know, when my father, and there's a little bit about this in Hollywood and God, is that, like, when my father was a child, he always told us that his mother died when he was 5, but it became clear after he died that his mother abandoned the family when he was 5, and it's not we're not even certain whether, you know, my grandparents were married to, you know, to each other or not, and you could tell that story haunted my father like his whole life, to the point where he couldn't talk about it, and so as a result, it's kind of haunted me my whole life. But I mean, you know, I belong to all of those little sites on, you know, these websites you can join, like Genealogy, and every once in a while I'll troll through there, and you'll discover, you know, I'll discover my, you know, my grandfather's World War I, you know, papers or something like that, and then there'll be, you know, like this kind of hand scrawled thing about who this woman was that, you know, is my grandmother, and I just wish I knew more. I mean, it's a project that if I actually had a lot of time, you know, like if I had 2 years to do something, I would love to just kind of research that and try to figure out a way of like not writing a memoir about it, but just try to create the circumstances around the people that are involved in it.